Hello, I'm Dan Heber, and this is the lecture video to accompany the reading assignment for Hobbes. And Hobbes is one of the three people that we're going to be discussing from section 10.3 of your textbook. And the major topic here is sort of addressing two related questions. The first question is, what is it that justifies governmental authority? Because the government has a lot of authority. The government has a lot of power. The government can throw you in prison for not paying taxes. That's a lot of power that the government has. And so one question that philosophers ask is, well, what is the basis of that justification? What justifies governmental authority in the broadest sense? But then there's a related question, because to the question of governmental authority, we're going to be looking at Hobbes and Locke as offering sort of two different competing versions of the social contract in an attempt to answer the question of what justifies governmental authority. But there's this other related question, and the related question is, well, what does a just government look like? And to that question, we're going to be looking at the social contract offered by the version of the social contract theory offered by John Rawls. And so I'm going to have three different videos. I'm going to have one video dedicated to Hobbes, one lecture video dedicated to Locke, and another lecture video dedicated to Rawls. So I'm going to scroll past some of those preliminaries and just get to a discussion of Hobbes here. And remember, our focus in Hobbes is what justifies governmental authority. And Hobbes attempted to answer that question in his 1651 work, The Leviathan. And there's a picture here of the frontispiece of that work, and I just want to talk about that a little bit. Look at some of the symbolism here. The Leviathan, of course, is a reference to this, this great beast that's mentioned in the Bible. And the idea there is that it is a powerful entity, the Leviathan. And whenever Hobbes spoke about the Leviathan, he really has in mind an absolute monarchy. In Hobbes's mind, that's the best form of government, for reasons that I'll talk about in a little bit. So that's why we have this symbolism here of the Leviathan. And notice that the Leviathan is composed, the body of the Leviathan is composed of a bunch of homunculi. Homunculi is the plural version of the Latin word homunculus, which just means small, fully formed person. So the idea here is that the body of the Leviathan, the body of this absolute monarch, is composed of the citizenry, is composed of individuals. And you'll notice that, in the Leviathan's right hand, it's got the sword, and in the left hand, the Leviathan has the scepter. Of course, the sword represents power and the scepter represents wisdom, right? So the idea being here that the Leviathan is both wise and powerful. And where does the Leviathan derive the power? From the citizenry, from all the individuals that come together. And of course, that coming together is the social contract. So with those sort of introductory comments out of the way, let's get to the body of the Leviathan itself. And Hobbes opens up here with a statement that philosophers call, or a theory rather, that philosophers call psychological egoism. Hobbes is saying that human beings are selfish. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. This is just a description. People are selfish. People look out for themselves. People are fundamentally self-interested. So what Hobbes is doing here is, sort of states that what he sees as a descriptive fact, that human beings are selfish. And then he traces out some implications that arise from that selfishness. He says here that we are fundamentally selfish, but we're also fundamentally similar in the sense that we all have the same basic wants, needs, and desires, and we are all fundamentally equal. Now that equality requires some additional qualifications, right? Because there's a certain sense in which, we're not equal. Some people are stronger than others. Some people are faster than others. Some people have musical talent, and others don't, right? So what Hobbes means by saying that we are fundamentally equal is that we all have the same basic needs, wants, and desires, and even the weakest of us is capable of killing the strongest of us. Now, as a result of that equality, we have this condition of tension. We have this condition where we don't trust one another because we all have the same basic needs, wants, and desires. We all need food, we all need water, we all need shelter, but there's finite access to that. So we end up in this condition of competition where I'm trying to get what I need to survive, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? And you're going to try to get what you need to survive. But as a result of that, we could potentially end up in competition with one another for the same resource. So this is where Hobbes starts to trace out some implications of this similarity. From this equality of ability, right? We are all in the state of nature here, and by state of nature, Hobbes just means a condition prior to the formation of civil government and civil society. That's all he means whenever he uses that phrase, state of nature, prior to culture, prior to society, prior to government. And Hobbes identifies these three principal causes. First, cause of quarrel, competition. Secondly, diffidence. And by diffidence, Hobbes, and the word diffidence is basically just the opposite of confidence. By diffidence, it just means that you don't know what somebody else is going to be doing. But you do know that they're selfish, and so you might do a preemptive attack on that person simply to prevent them from attacking you. And thirdly, glory. So you might just want the reputation of being the biggest, baddest person on the block, and so maybe that's why you're attacking somebody. Maybe you're attacking somebody because you're afraid they're going to attack you, or maybe you're attacking somebody just because, there's only so much access to fresh water and you want to make sure that, that you have access to it. So here we have a very famous quotation from Thomas Hobbes. I'm not going to read all of it, but I would encourage you to give this paragraph here close scrutiny, because there he's laying out not only what he sees as our fundamental selfish nature, but he's tracing out implications of that. And he's saying, life in the state of nature isn't really all that great, because we're constantly looking over our shoulder, wondering if we're going to attack, or we are planning our next attack of somebody else. So it's what Hobbes describes as the condition of war of all against all. I'm trying to get what I need to survive, and you're trying to get what you need to survive. And Hobbes gives some evidence for this base selfishness, right? This green highlighted sentence rather here. So what Hobbes is doing is responding to somebody, the person who might say, oh, come on, humans aren't that bad, humans aren't that selfish. Well, Hobbes says, well, let that person therefore consider with himself. When taking a journey, he arms himself and seeks to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. And even when in his own house, he locks his chests. So notice that whenever you leave your car, you lock your doors, right? And the reason you lock your car doors isn't because you think people are fundamentally good and looking out for your self-interest. You do that because you think that people are fundamentally bad and are going to be trying to take from you if they think that they can get away from it. And not only are you fearful of the people that are outside of your house, you're fearful of the people that live inside your house, right? For even when you're in your own house, you lock your chest, right? So that means that, Hobbes is simply using that as an example to point out that human beings are fundamentally selfish. You can't take it for granted that someone else is looking out for your best interest. People are looking out for their own self-interest, and what somebody else wants to do could greatly conflict with what I want to do. So we need to be wary about that. This is an interesting passage here. Hobbes says that the desires and passions of man, and again, you'll have to just let this sexist language go. Hobbes is writing in the 1600s. He's using the word man as a placeholder for, for humanity, for people more generally. He says that the desires and passions of a man are in themselves no sin, right? So what he means is that we're just selfish. This is how we're made. It doesn't make any sense to tell us not to breathe oxygen because that's how we're made. It doesn't make any sense to tell me not to have two kidneys because guess what? I was born that way, right? I just have two kidneys. Well, Hobbes is going to say that you're just born selfish. You're born as a creature that respirates oxygen. You're born as a creature that has two kidneys. And guess what? You're just born as a creature who is selfish. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. It's just the way you are constructed. So an implication from that, as Hobbes says, no more are the actions that proceed from those passions as being a sin. Meaning that in the state of nature, Hobbes says there is no right or wrong, right? There is no good or bad. There's just good for me and bad for somebody else, right? And there's what's good for somebody else is potentially bad for me. So good and bad in the abstract, right? In the objective sense don't exist. There's just me trying to get what I need to survive and you trying to get what you need to survive. And if you end up needing to kill me to get the thing that you need to survive, well, that's unfortunate for me, but it's not an injustice to me, right? That's what Hobbes is going to say. In the state of nature, there is no right or wrong. There is no sin in the state of nature. There's just you with your selfish motivations and me with my selfish motivations. Again, in this green highlighted passage here, what Hobbes is pointing out is something that I just mentioned, this notion that he's tracing out the implications of this law of nature. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where no law, there is no injustice. So whenever Hobbes is referring to the common power, he's talking about the Leviathan. What does the Leviathan do? Enforces the agreements that we make with one another. But notice that in absence of that enforcement, and if there's not this third party enforcing the agreements that individuals make with one another, then they can't be trusted precisely because of the aforementioned selfishness. Because if I think it's to my advantage to break my word and to go against the agreement, well, that's precisely what I'm going to do because I'm selfish. And if you think it's to your advantage to break your word, then that's precisely what you're going to do because you're fundamentally selfish, or at least according to Hobbes. So Hobbes says that we need this Leviathan. We need this enforcer of the contract, somebody that will make my situation worse off if I break my word. So then I can be trusted, and only in that set of circumstances. And I have a visual aid here, sort of a meme-based one, as you might expect by now. The Leviathan, sort of, the gun-holding Gru. That's this person here, the Leviathan. And notice that what the Leviathan does is validates individual agreements and contracts through force. So now we have the yes Chad over here, party to the social contract, and we have another yes Chad over here, party to the social contract. So this contract here, whenever this person says, hey, I won't steal any of your corn if you don't steal any of my chickens. Do you agree with that? Yes. And, I won't steal any of your chickens if you don't steal any of my corn. Do you agree with that? Yes. Yes. But notice that in absence of the Leviathan, if it's just this Chad over here and this Chad over here, well, made this agreement, well, now this Chad is going to think, well, I can catch this person off guard now because, I just promised not to steal their corn. And now they're going to go to bed sleeping easy tonight, and that's going to make it easier for me to steal their corn, right? And that's precisely what Chad's going to do because we're all selfish. So what we need to validate these contracts is to have a Leviathan to enforce it, right? So now the Leviathan is going to say, well, you better not steal any of his corn, and you better not steal any of his chickens, because I'm going to make life so bad for you if you do that. So now, under this set of condition, whenever Chad says, yes, I'm not going to steal any of your corn, and whenever this Chad says, yes, I'm not going to steal any of your chickens, you can believe him, right? Not because Chad is fundamentally good, because Chad is fundamentally afraid of being punished by the Leviathan. That's why you can trust Chad. So Chad's selfishness hasn't gone anywhere. He's still selfish, right? But now you can trust him. And why can you trust him? Not because he's looking out for your interest, because he's looking out for his own interest, because he doesn't want to get punished by the Leviathan. And so this is what validates the social contract. And this is why it's so important to have the governmental authority. The governmental authority is validated because in absence of governmental authority, it's just me with my selfish impulses and you with your selfish impulses and everybody else with their selfish impulses. And that's not going to work out well for us, right? We need peace. We need harmony. And we can only have peace and harmony if we have agreements, but we can only have valid agreements in the presence of someone with sufficient power to coerce us, to force us into doing the things we say that we're going to do. And that's what justifies governmental authority. So now let me move that back. And here again, Hobbes is just talking about the implications of our fundamental freedom and what happens in the state of nature. And Hobbes is very specific that our freedom in the state of nature is so extensive that we even have a right to one another's body, right? What Hobbes means there is that it's no holds bars. It's anything goes in the state of nature. And that's what makes it so important for us to have a Leviathan, right? Because if I'm living in a condition where if somebody else is strong enough, they have a right to my body, well, that's not going to work out well for me. So notice that in elevating a Leviathan, I'm giving up some of my individual liberty. In the state of nature, I'm at complete liberty. I can do whatever the hell I want. And that sounds really good at first, right? But the problem is, if I can do whatever the hell I want, that means other people can do whatever the hell they want. And if somebody else has the right to do whatever the hell they want, then that could adversely affect me. But I, being selfish, don't want to be adversely affected. So I give up some of my claims of liberty. And other parties to the social contract will also give up certain claims to liberty, give them up to this Leviathan, who is now going to serve to enforce the social contract and make it possible for me to trust others whenever they enter into a covenant. So that's what Hobbes means here when he says to lay down the right to all things. In the state of nature, I have the right to anything. So why would I be willing to give that up? Well, because it's better for me. I realize that it's better for me to do so. Now, this last thing I'll mention here is how we're going to be tying this into our discussion of John Locke. Because the key difference, one of the key differences between Hobbes's version of the social contract and Locke's theory of the social contract is what Hobbes is going to say, that the state of nature is so bad that any government is better than no government. I said before that Hobbes's preferred version of the Leviathan, his preferred version of governmental authority was the absolute monarchy, because he believed that it was just easier to enforce all these social contracts if one person has all of that vested power. Totalitarian, what this person says goes. It's going to keep everyone else's selfish impulses in check. And that's the sole purpose of the Leviathan, according to Hobbes. And we all agree to it because we recognize that we're going to be better off in a condition where I can trust someone else. Because in the absence of someone to enforce agreements, I can't trust anyone else. And if I can't trust anyone else, I'm constantly looking over my back and we're not advancing our own agenda. We're never going to have a chance to relax. Life is going to be nasty, brutish, and short. So that's why that's how we come together, and it's also why we come together to form this social contract. Now, as a result of that, As a result of that social contract, notice that because the Leviathan is the enforcer of the contract, the Leviathan is not part of the social contract, which is to say that in the presence of this enforcement, I can have an obligation to someone else. You can have an obligation to someone else, meaning that you can do something to violate this person's rights, and this person can do something to violate your rights. But the Leviathan can't violate your rights. And the reason why is because a right can only be violated if there's an agreement between two parties. But the agreement between two parties is only valid if there is a third party to enforce it. So notice that there is no contract between you and the governmental authority, because that would suppose this third party over here who would be validating that agreement between you and the Leviathan. And that would diminish the role of this Leviathan here, because you would have this eternally branching tree, which you're always introducing a new Leviathan whose purpose is to enforce the agreement between you and the other Leviathan. And so we can't have that. So by definition, the Leviathan is not part of the social contract. The Leviathan is what makes the social contract possible. And that's why once you enter into the social contract, you are under the obligation to follow the rules set forth by the Leviathan. What Hobbes is going to say is that the absolute worst dictator is still better than not having government at all. Remember, that's the state of nature. State of nature is so bad, so horrific, that any government is better than no government. The Leviathan, the government, doesn't have an obligation to you. The Leviathan is what makes it possible for you to have an obligation and a corresponding right to another individual in the society. So with those things being said, I'm going to bring this video to a close, and whenever we pick up in the next video, I'm going to be talking about John Locke and his version of the social contract. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I'll ask you to enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll be in contact with you. Well, I'll see you in the next video.